Welcome to another edition of Dateline News and Conversation. We're attempting to go live again. My guest tonight is an old friend. He's been on the show several times, Ron Ridenour from Denmark. Ron, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm always glad to be here.
Well, it's always a pleasure. You are a longtime journalist, a lifelong troublemaker, as an activist, a communist, anti-imperialist. You have got so many strikes against you, among them living in Cuba for a number of years and writing, I think, 5 or 6 books. You've lived in Latin America, I think Nicaragua and El Salvador. And I'm really happy to have you back on the show. Now, you're in Denmark. You've been living in Denmark for, I forget how many years now, maybe 20. And you have a wonderful partner who you have been with for a very long time. And I want to start with this, Ron. I saw a photograph. I don't know if it was on Facebook or somewhere, but it was a picture of a converted bus somewhere in Denmark that had been converted into a grocery store, which would drive through neighborhoods so that the elderly, primarily, I'm sure not only the elderly took part of that, but so the elderly could find it easier to go shopping. What can you tell me about that, Ron? What's the background? Is this a welfare state?
Well, it still is somewhat a welfare state, but it's losing that status. Sometimes I give too much historical background, but I want to do it here and hopefully a very few sentences. When Bernie Sanders was running for president, I despised his analysis. I mean, he and I, not that we knew each other, but we worked with SNCC, this the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Martin Luther King's Young Youth Group, and CORE, and other civil rights groups, just to get to fight, just to get Black people the right to vote. And Sanders, was in that. And then, he got into politics. So when you get into the Democratic Party, you inevitably get corrupted. And that's what happened to him. He was making this point during his campaign that the best society in the world that he knew was Denmark, because it had a socialist system, welfare socialist system. Well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. When when the Russian people made a peaceful socialist revolution in 1917, and then after that, of course, the aristocracy came in with a white army, and the United States and Europe came in while the First World War was still going on against Germany to try to crush that revolution. So the Social Democrats, who did not follow with the Communist Party's approach, said to the capitalist class throughout Europe, but especially in the Scandinavian countries and from Germany up, if you don't give us a welfare state, if you don't give us some of our needs, necessities, the right to organize, the right to have pensions and other rights, other necessities, then we'll let the communists, or we'll join the communists and have a revolution. Well, of course, this took several months and some years, and not just a few sentences, but that's what basically happened in much of Europe. Now, the United States never had a working class that was that strong, and whatever its strength was smashed, by the Pinkertons, by the FBI, and even the CIA after some time in 1947 when it was created. So this welfare state has been functioning, well enough, especially in Scandinavia, that there is no real uprisings. There's no significant communist left. And then when this war started, this special military operation, which really became a war, and now we're 4 years into it. The government here started to please Biden. They've always wanted to please whoever is the president of the United States. And the Mette Frederiksen, who is the Social Democrat prime minister, she wanted to please Trump too in 2019. But when he said he was going to come here to talk with her, and he said, "I'd like to, see about Greenland. Maybe we could buy it." And she said to the local media that was an absurd thing to say. Well, Trump hates to be insulted, and his narcissism is such that he called her nasty and decided not to come to Denmark. Well, they met anyway shortly thereafter in London at a NATO meeting. And she came out of the meeting with him and said, "Oh, we swing well together." So then at that point, Denmark was only using 1.3 of its, GNP, gross national product, for defense and war. And of course, Denmark had been with all the wars the United States conducted since 1991, all the Middle Eastern wars, and beyond that as well. And then when this war started in Ukraine, they started to increase their military percentage, and now it's 3.5. It's almost tripled, and their monies to their own military has also doubled and is now tripling, as well as all the money and weapons that they send to Ukraine. So this inevitably has decreased what was being spent for welfare, and food prices have risen dramatically. Inflation is not so high, but food prices are, and welfare to old people especially. So these buses that you saw, I don't know how it was that it was described, but they're not folksy little buses that go around and help old people instead of going to markets. They're giving away free food. This has not happened to any significant extent. Even last year, I don't know the exact figures, but it was said in the media recently that the giving food to people who say they need it, and most do, I think, has doubled at least from last year, and it's much higher than it was 3 years ago. So just to give you a couple of figures, the largest magazine in this country is called Seniors Cause. We're about 1 million people who are, older people, and this has a 750,000 circulation. They wrote recently that food prices have skyrocketed. The average Danes were using 15% of their income for food, and now it's 17%. Well, that doesn't sound so high, but when you take into account the most common foods that people are buying, such as milk and butter and all milk products, meat, especially hamburgers and have risen from 17 to 67%. Cheese, 44%. Meat, 50%. People who need help at home, who have not gone to pension senior homes, but still live in their own house, the ability for them to get help has decreased significantly in the last 3 years. 40% of people who need to get out of the house to take a walk, where they have earlier had somebody coming from the community, from the city's government, now 40% do not have that assistance. So they're stuck in their houses all this time. 20% of people 3 years ago who needed a bath but couldn't get it in time, so 3 to 4 weeks. Now that's doubled to 37%. there are many, many more statistics in that genre. But it got so bad this year that the Social Democrats have always had most of the large cities, the major mayors. In many of the cities, they have more than one mayor. They have sub mayors for specific areas. And especially in the three largest cities, that's the case. In Copenhagen, the mayor of Copenhagen, the overmayor of Copenhagen, has always been a social democrat for 106 years. And this year, they lost. Not only did they lose, but they came in third place. This is about the only city in Denmark that still has a significant amount of so-called left voters. That is to say, there are two parties to the left of the Social Democrats. One calls itself People's Socialist Party, and the other one calls itself the Red Green List, which started in 91 as amalgamation of the traditional Communist Party, pro-Moscow, Khrushchev Party, the major Trotskyist Party, and what was called the Left Socialist. They merged to form this organization that I just mentioned in 91. They still saluted the Internationale. They still talked about socialism. In just 34 years, they've turned dramatically. You can hardly call them social democrats any longer. So socialism is certainly not on the agenda. The so-called Socialist People's Party, they don't even know how to spell the word socialist. I mean, they are, as right-wing as is the Social Democrats. Well, they took over the over-mayor post in Copenhagen. The Social Democrats only won 3 significant cities. They lost most of the mayor's positions in the town, the smaller villages. They lost 1/2 of their mandates on the city councils. They 3 years ago, Mette Frederiksen had 37% of the people supporting her. This year, it fell to 17%. And now, there'll be national elections for the parliament and the states, the prime minister within a year. We're getting a Christmas package. We're getting something about, it costs so much, also more money, significantly more money for our heating. And they want to get rid of all gas heating. So they're buying more and more oil from the United States, gas, the so-called, what is it called? That fracking gas, that they ship over here, paying 3 times as much as they were paying for Russia's gas. And of course, it was Norway and the United States that did the sabotage of Nord Stream. And Sweden and Denmark were informed, and they didn't do it physically, but they knew it was happening because it was in their economic territory, especially Denmark's economic territory. Their largest island, which is east of the mainland, Bornholm, it was in their area that this sabotage took place, and was the greatest human destruction of the oil, of the waters, and the seas, and the air, and the air, and the greatest destruction ever. So it cost us a lot more money to heat our homes. I'm paying 3 times. You can see this little gas. This is what I have. This is my heat. My little house is 65 square meters, and it cost me 3 times today what I was paying 3 years ago, just to have winter. So the people are not. Nobody's for Putin. Nobody's for Russia. They all think Ukraine has the right to win, and of course we never have any speaker for Russia. I used to be able to write for several of the dailies here even when I couldn't write in Danish. But now I can't write for any of them. And it's not just me. The schools do not allow, even the universities do not allow a professor to speak for Russia in this war. One big case that made media was that one student in a classroom taught by a Danish professor who was fluent in Ukraine and Russian, written 3 books on Ukraine and Russia, starts his course that's to explain about what is Russia and Ukraine by saying he does not support the Russian war in Ukraine, but he wants to tell the people why they're doing it. Well, one student opposed his lectures and said to the administration that he was pro-Putin. They fired him. One student complained, and they fired him. This is the social democracy Bernie Sanders, the socialist Denmark Bernie Sanders that you support. So, and you also support, of course, Ukraine winning this war. That would be and if they came into NATO, that would be the 7th country bordering Russia out of 14 countries that are in NATO. I mean, 6 countries are already in NATO, and Ukraine would be the 7th. And of course, anybody who wants to think objectively poses the question to a pro-Ukraine fascist military. What do you think the United States would do if Russia or China suddenly took over bases in Canada and in Mexico? Well, remember Cuba. They didn't have the right to have weapons that the United States didn't want them to have in 1962. That's a long but actually brief answer.
Wow, I really appreciate that summary, because I had no idea, and I'm sure most people who probably are living in Europe have no idea, but much less people in America. So historical context, I've always said, is extremely important to understanding what is going on. Now, I have a couple of questions for you, because I would assume that Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, the Scandinavian countries are experiencing the same economic difficulties as are all of the Europeans, because of a couple of things. One, they were cut off from cheap Russian gas, Nord Stream 2, as you mentioned. You're being forced now to buy imported fracking gas from the United States at triple the price. But then, and this is the question that I'd like to know, is it the same thing in Denmark? I'm pretty sure it's the same thing in Norway and Sweden. I don't have any contacts right now in Finland, but they're all claiming that they're having to spend more and more money on NATO, and they're having to spend more and more money directly helping Ukraine. Are these the basic reasons, root causes for the economic difficulties in Denmark and across the rest of Scandinavia?
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about it. What you said, Norway has so much oil. They got a bigger deal of the oil back when I came here I came here first in 1980, and it was around that time. Well, a real social democrat, that's to say somebody who understood that the working class actually existed and called them the working class. Anker Jørgensen was the prime minister, and he came from the working class. He was, in fact, an unskilled worker, and it was exceptional that he became the only time that a worker has been a prime minister. And um, and to this day there is no such thing as a worker prime minister. Um, then both Denmark and Norway, especially Norway, have enough oil to export it. So they're very rich, and they're still not hurting that much. Scandinavia generally is not hurting nearly as much as is the so-called Great Britain and France and Germany. Their economy is collapsing. We cannot say that in Scandinavia the economy is collapsing, and there are still these, like these buses you saw, or there's certain places you can go to where the city is giving out food. That's a new phenomenon, and it's embarrassing. But we're not talking about a large percentage of people that this is affecting, but it's affecting enough so that this is my most recent article that I've written for Covert Action Magazine.
Yeah.
You see, this is the Prime Minister here, Mette Frederiksen, and this is Arne. Now, Arne has been chosen. I don't know exactly how, but three decades ago, as the working class spokesperson for the not politically but symbolically for Social Democrats who have this reputation and history of supporting working class needs, or the needs. He came out. These were regional elections, not parliamentary elections. I just talked to you about in November, where the Social Democrats lost so much. He didn't vote for, and he said, "I'm not going to vote for the Social Democrats any longer." After 40 years of doing so, and he just retired, and one of the daily newspapers quoted him saying, "Arne's main frustration are the government's financial priorities, including large-scale aid to Ukraine, high food prices, high food taxes, because they're taxing even more much of the food, while at the same time they decreased the tax on chocolate and other candies, and not even the mass media understands that." And he says, they're spending too much money abroad. And this is a direct quote: "I see no logic in a system that keeps high rates on fresh produce while lowering others, as I said, such as candy. We have a huge surplus of resources, but why must they be burnt up for a war which we cannot win?" Now, that is the first time in all this time that I have seen the mass media. Of course, I don't read it every day, and I don't see TV every day. But from what I know personally and what I hear from others, the media has never talked like this before. I mean, the Social Democrats are finished for a long time now. But Mette Frederiksen is kind of like Trump. She's so narcissistic, she can't recognize her own failure. So
Wow.
They're going to run her again. But many people in the Social Democratic leadership are saying she should step down and they should find somebody else. So we're going to have some months before us, before the parliamentary elections, in which there is going to be tremendous decay of the left. There's an increase in right. There's even two more right-wing parties. And the most right-wing party doesn't say it officially, but they won out of this war, Ukraine. So what's happening in some of the central and southern countries of Europe is beginning to happen now in Scandinavia with Ukraine. Ukraine is no longer, an issue of massive support. But in all of the newspapers and magazines, every day, there are ads, for private persons and private organizations to send money. Now they should send warm clothing for the troops. Denmark is also the only country in EU or NATO that has brought forth inside Denmark a war-making Ukrainian company to make rocket fuel for 3 of their rockets. The company is called 4 Points, Oh yeah, and and the major mastermind of this company, 4 Points. What is his name? Timur Minditi. He was the number two in command. This good friend, of Zelensky, and he fled. He fled the country in this corruption, cases. Finally, the mass media here is covering the corruption cases because they weren't doing it earlier in this war, but they're now doing it, which is a clear sign that they don't want this war any longer. They know they've lost it, and they don't want it anymore. This guy is now in Israel. this is this is where you flee if you're a fascist and no longer welcome in Scandinavia. You or Ukraine. So you flee to Russia. I mean, I'm sorry, to Israel or the United States. Now, this is so bad that 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 the only the government state intelligence service, it's under the army, under the military. It's called the Danish Defense Intelligence Agency. The United States has 17. Denmark only report to NSA, CIA. That's a longer story, and it was disclosed by what's our friend who's now living in Russia, who disclosed all this? Snowden, Edward Snowden, in 2013. Our conversation now, all the conversations, everything, mobiles, telephones, the TV, all this is going to NSA, and the United and Denmark doesn't even say I'm sorry. But all of the masses are not thinking, well, they think I don't have anything to hide. Well, after the Social Democratic loss, it's inconceivable. They've said, and the United States is a potential military threat to their sovereignty. Wow. I mean, they have been eating shit from every president in the United States since a happy colony of the United States, turning away because Trump, president in the history of the United States since the first liar, who had hundreds of slaves and had hundreds of votes, until the Civil War. So we're living in a time of total confusion and uproar, but uproar without anybody being on the streets. I mean, there's no organization that is even in the streets. They just I don't know what they do. I don't know what people do here, but it's so disgusting to live in a country where the people don't have any respect for their own sovereignty. But maybe it'll change, but it won't change without a leadership, a real Communist Party. The Communist parties here have a couple hundred members. They see Russia and China as imperialist. They that's their analysis. That both the Trotskyists and the Communist parties see Russia as an imperialist country. And they've got so much land, they don't know what to do with all this land. I mean, there's so much that's not been explored, as you know, of course. They don't need anybody else. They don't need to take over another land. But the vast majority of the people here are convinced that is a major reason for them to be in Ukraine, because they never get the real reasons that we know, that all your readers know. When you and I'm with a group of people, you might want to talk about it later on. Killing Democracy. We're 5 authors of this book that shows how the United States has been since the Second World War, but long before that. Color revolutions and regime changes and so forth and so on. And that's what they did in Ukraine in 2014. And they started to do that in 1991 when Gorbachev, I don't know how one man can stop the Soviet Union. But they had a lot of problems, obviously. But he did it against the will of the majority of the people. You know, I'm saying many two things. I'm getting confused. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So, Ron, I have two things I want to talk with before we finish. This is just a very direct question. You don't have to go into a lot of detail. Are there U.S. military bases and installations in Denmark?
What about them?
Are there U.S. military bases and installations in Denmark?
Well, they're coming. They decided to do that 2 years ago. It's one of the few countries that has never allowed, in a permanent way, since '45, foreign troops. It's been a cause célèbre. Danes did not want foreign troops, but until Trump, they love the United States so much that they'll let them come in. So they already decided under Biden that they would have parts of 3 bases, and one of them is where this rocket fuel is being produced for these missiles, which can go 800 kilometers into Russia. And that's happening right now. The factory began to be constructed the 1st of December, and somehow or another they think that they're going to be able to produce fuel for these rockets that they're going to be able to use before Russia wins the war.
Well, I want to finish with this. It's back in the news. Trump again stating that he wants Greenland. What's the reaction there in Denmark?
Well, that's I earlier said the most significant reaction is what the Defense Intelligence Agency has ascertained. Now that it's a danger, and he's going to send some Louisiana governor here in Greenland to try to convince them to go with the United States. But you see, there are only 40,000 Greenlanders in Greenland, and there are 10,000 native ethnic Danes that live in Greenland. There are only 50,000 people on this island, and it's a huge island. And there's all of the major powers are in that area, the Arctic. So both Trump and Denmark make a big deal out of this would be an area for China and Russia to take over. So there's no opposition to doing something military for to hold the Greenland in either Danish or U.S. hands. I don't know how this is going to end, but Trump insists that it's again on the agenda, but Denmark is sending more money, more military, more surveillance to Greenland to try to convince Trump that they're going to do the job. So this is a major issue. I don't get any sense that there are very many Greenlanders who want to be a part of the United States. I don't think that's an issue. I did a couple of radio programs on this some time ago, and I haven't done that much research, but I don't see any evidence that there's more than a few people who are clapping for Trump in Greenland.
Well, thanks for this information and the update on the political situation in Denmark. I want to say in closing, you mentioned the book that you are one of several co-authors, Killing Democracy. As you know, I will be hosting a show with all of you, Finian Cunningham, KJ No, Dan Kovalik, Jeremy Lazarov, and yourself. And we'll be doing that early in the new year. So I'm very happy to share that book and the content of that book, which I think is very important. It's loaded with facts, dates. It's so well documented, and I think to have it all in one place is really a good thing. Ron, I can't thank you enough. I want you to take care.
What can I say? A last word here. Jeremy Kuzmarov. Yeah, you mispronounced. Jerry Kuzmarov is one of the 5 authors, and he is the Covert Action Magazine managing editor, and James Bradley, who is a very well-known author, was interviewed by Finian Cunningham about this book, and he said that if in 100 years there's one book that people should read to know what how the United States has killed democracy, you should read this book. So that was a major support comment from a man who knows what he's talking about. So I look forward, we all do, to being with you in a week's time or however much it is before we meet again. Keep up the good work, my comrade.
Okay, and thank you. Have a happy new year. Let's hope that next year is not only going to be happy, but peaceful.
It's not going to be